Welcome to today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. I'm Roby Brock. We're joined by Congressman French Hill, a Republican representing the 2nd District of Arkansas. Congressman Hill, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Roby.
Let's begin with Russia and the indictments that came out on Friday from Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller here. He laid out a pretty comprehensive and complex way that the Russians have tried to infiltrate the 2016 election. Did he make a forceful case?
I think he did. I don't think Russia interference in our elections is new. There's evidence of it back to the Reagan administration. It's certainly been a big issue in Europe, in Montenegro, and of course everyone knows about Ukraine. So this is their specialty. To use the ubiquitous social media platforms takes it to a whole new level for me in 2016.
Well, and they seem to have had operatives on the ground here, either interacting with Americans unwittingly, I think was the appropriate phrase there. So there have been sanctions that have been leveled against Russia from Congress, a very bipartisan vote on that earlier, I guess late last year.
Right.
The president has not enforced those sanctions yet. It seems to me that you guys have three choices. You can enforce the current sanctions or force the president to do so, drop them altogether, or you can do something even more forceful. What do you advocate?
Well, first of all, we have sanctions on Russia now because of their annexation of the Crimea and what they've done in Ukraine. And last August, Congress did pass, as you say, bipartisan additional sanctions on top officials in the Russian government and oligarchs. Secretary Mnuchin came to our committee last week and I asked him about that. And he said that they named the 200 oligarchs and senior officials required by the act by January 29th. And that he expected rolling sanctions to be brought out in the next few weeks on that. He said our team is the same team working on Venezuelan sanctions, North Korean sanctions, and Iran sanctions. But he didn't make any excuses. He says they're at work.
What are the sanctions that have been leveled? What's the brunt of them? Where will they hit the hardest on these 200 oligarchs or on the Russian economy?
So anyone, the Russian sanctions now are economic in relation to the Ukraine, and they've cut back on Russian exports and Russian economic access to the global system. These new sanctions that we propose would be identifying people's work on transferring arms into Syria, transferring arms into the Ukraine, cyber activities, and they will be economic sanctions against those individuals.
Will that be tough enough, especially in light of what you've seen in this latest indictment? Do you think there needs to be more?
Well, I think we'll certainly take into account now what we've learned from the special counsel's indictment to see if we need to go in a different direction. But cyber was certainly included in the sanction regime that we passed in August, and that was referenced obviously in the indictment, the activities political and cyber related. But we could add more, and I think we'll study what's happened politically in the indictment and see if there's another direction that we can go in economic sanctions.
I think some of this maybe ties in together here. Obviously, this is of national security concern that they would have tried to affect our elections the way that they did. There has been reporting over the last week to 10 days that shows that there are quite a number of White House officials who do not have appropriate national security clearances to be dealing with some of the sensitive information there. Some of them, such as Jared Kushner, are very high level of lack of clearance there. Does that concern you? Should there be more concern coming from Congress over this? It seems to be quite muted at this point in time.
Well, I've had concerns about the clearance process since I've been in Congress the past 3 years. There are over 1 million people with a top secret clearance that goes through. Some of them are approved by contractors, some of them are approved directly by the FBI or Secret Service process.
Are you one of them?
I am one of them.
You do have security?
I do have a security clearance, yes. And I had one back in my old days. I think it's inappropriate for people in the White House not to have their clearance completed before they get in the information flow. Naturally, I would argue, having been a White House staffer before, that if they don't have clearance, then they're not seeing the material. Yeah. That's just not possible.
But they are. So what do you?
I have a problem with that. Yeah, well, I think we should.
That?
Well, I think the committee should look into that process and see what's being done about it, and also find out what was the delay. Is it a contractor delay, an FBI delay? let's get to the bottom of why those people do not have the adequate security clearance to do their job.
Another bit of reporting, and I'm shifting topics here to the National Rifle Association, the NRA.
Yep.
The New York Times, I believe, has put in a report that you're the top House member in Arkansas to have received money from the NRA.
Yep.
According to your campaign and according to my research, you've received about $3,000 in direct contributions from the NRA. You were the beneficiary in 2014 of some independent expenditure money for your candidacy and against your opponent, Pat Hayes. I'm going to give you a chance to kind of lay your argument out there as to how misrepresentative this article may be, or really you still benefited from the independent expenditure. So maybe put this in perspective.
Yeah, well, I think that's good. Thanks for asking that question. Yeah, direct campaign contributions in 2014, I think, were $1,000, and in 2016, $2,000. But back in my first race in 2014, my opponent claimed he was endorsed by the NRA and had a made-up logo and made-up endorsement TV ad. And so that attracted the NRA to say, well, that's not true. And they did spend a substantial amount of money against my opponent in 2014 and some money in favor of me, and that accounts for the difference. But as you say, it was an independent expenditure. It's not anything I had something to do with particularly. So, but I agree that I did benefit from it indirectly, but it was prompted by my opponent at the time claiming that he'd been endorsed by the NRA.
Sure. But from a public perception, and maybe help me with this too, so how does someone not feel like you having benefited from $1 million worth of NRA spending is going to influence your vote?
Well, it just doesn't. I have people who contribute to me from all over, all walks of life, and I do my best job representing the people of Arkansas and take my 35 years of business experience and government experience to try to make the best decisions I can on behalf of the 2nd Congressional District.
You feel like you feel like you voted against an NRA bill of any particular interest since you've been in Congress?
Well, I don't know that we've had that many NRA-related bills while we've been in Congress. My view would be if I agreed with the policy, I support it, and if I don't support it.
All right, let's talk about what we have seen horrifically happen in Florida this past couple of days with the school shooting in Parkland. It has certainly given new rise to gun violence, which we have seen here in the 2nd Congressional District, which we've seen in Las Vegas, we've seen in other parts of Florida, all over the country, really. Some have said that this feels different in terms of maybe some sort of tipping point for pushing forward on some legislation that might make a difference. Do you feel like something is different as a result of this last shooting?
Well, I think it was horrific. I've seen this year the trauma personally from madmen with guns when I looked into the faces of my colleagues when they were attempted to be killed by a person in Old Town Alexandria at a 6:30 a.m. baseball game. And I've seen the horror from that and the blood from it. And then, our son this week is traumatized by what he saw. He's an 18-year-old high school senior. So these are tough things, and my attitude about it is we've been let down by our background check system this year. We saw the Las Vegas shooter was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. He should have been blocked from buying guns and ammunition and be in the background system. We saw this instance where this young man in Florida had been turned into an FBI tip line, and yet the FBI didn't pursue it. And I just think all of us as parents worried about our kids, we protect our government buildings, we protect our airports. Why can we not come together and find a way to adequately protect our kids at school? This should be fundamental. And so this idea of getting our background check system working better, finding a way to have a tip line, a whistleblower line that protects teachers and kids and students to make sure if they see something and say something that it can be followed up on would be very important.
What do you think's the breakdown there? If it's not working, the law is on the books to prevent something like this from happening. Does it require more money? Does it require a stricter or longer period of background check? Does it need a bigger commitment of resources. I mean, you're the elected official in Congress, and the Republicans control Congress, and I think that the nation is looking to you and to the Republican majority for leadership on this issue, and they're not seeing a plan.
Well, after the Vegas shooting, we passed a law in the House and sent it to the Senate that increased federal penalties on any government agency that did not report speedily and accurately into the background check system, with particular emphasis on our military, for example. So I think increased penalties for people who should report to the background check system and don't in a timely way, local law enforcement or federal officials. It's important, because if you are a felon, if you have a domestic violence case, if you've been dishonorably discharged, if you're illegally possessing a firearm based on age or one of these crimes, you ought to be in the background check
There was
system.
consensus for restricting bump stocks or even making them illegal after Las Vegas, and nothing ever moved on that. I think that adds to the frustration from folks.
70 of us, I was one of the 70 members of Congress that wrote the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Administration to reconsider their regulation about the bump stock issue. I thought that was something that should be re-looked at. The Obama administration had approved it and said it did not comply, and we've asked for it to be reassessed. And that is, to my understanding, is still being looked at by ATF.
You've been in the streets of Little Rock marching against violence in particularly communities that have had a lot of havoc wreaked on them by that. When you get back to Washington, D.C., what are you going to do? Are you going to organize a group of people? Are you going of elected officials? Are you going to put together some sort of comprehensive legislative approach to addressing some of the shortcomings that you see? Or do you feel like it's not in your jurisdiction? Do you feel like it's something that there's just going to be a lot of talk on, and 6 months later when we have another tragedy like this, we're going to look back and nothing really is going to change?
Well, I think in the federal system, this area of the background check system is something that we can focus on immediately. It's an area there's interest on in Congress. There's bipartisan support for that. And I think states need to look at their own laws as well. And I would say what I've learned here in Little Rock is that we have to have opportunities for these young men, principally young men between 18 and 25, and get them in school and with a job and with an education and with hope for the future, and not let them turn to the despair they see on the streets of Arkansas, where they use a firearm to commit a drug offense. And it's going to take both our education system, our family system, the sense of morality and civility in our society to make that better. And we need to enforce our laws to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and out of the hands of the mentally ill. We had a very good mental health bill that we passed in Congress, last Congress, that specifically talks about things like the HIPAA rules around mental health. We have 60% of drug deaths, gun deaths every year are from suicide, and we have more people in jail with mental health problems than we have in care facilities. And that is, I think, important. The rules about are you a danger to yourself or others, I don't think are being shared like they can be under HIPAA. And I think we ought to relook at HIPAA's provisions and who interprets those. We offer that in this mental health bill to encourage states to do that and practitioners, because if someone is in mental health treatment, they are also banned on that background check list. Are they being turned in?
These solutions that you're proposing, if the legislation doesn't exist already, will you be the sponsor of those?
I'll certainly work with, I will certainly work with my colleagues to try to find a way to do that, particularly the ones in the committees of jurisdiction. And this is something that we are talking about, but in the spending bill that we passed last week, there's mental health money in there that was approved on a 2-year basis by both houses of Congress, signed into law. I'd like to see some of that dedicated to this kind of purpose.
All right, Congressman French Hill, I'm not sure we'll have the answers anytime soon, but I think that there is definitely desire from everyone involved to see an attempt to make something happen.
Right,
So,
I agree. Thanks, Roby.
thank you for being here. All right, that's all for today's Talk Business and Politics Daily. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Roby Brock. We'll see you next time.
Arkansas Electric Cooperative Corporation provides electric energy across 2/3 of Arkansas. This is an exciting time in our energy history, with incredible progress being made in renewable energy and storage technologies. As our energy portfolio continues to diversify, we'll maintain an all-the-above strategy to provide reliable and affordable electricity. Ever since the first light bulbs were placed in our members' homes, electric cooperatives have been the solutions provider for our members, and we want to continue that well into the future.
Each day, the promise of our nation begins again. Arkansas and America moving forward. I help make that promise a reality. It's not for everyone, but people everywhere depend on us.
Oh, I love you too, sweetie.
Trucking delivers, or everything stops. And that's what drives me.